I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we are going to be continuing on with our 4-part series called Back to the Basics. This week we'll be talking about paragraphs. This is where I feel like we're moving a little bit more into the intermediate skills because paragraphs are so nuanced and there's so much, we talked about sentences and we talked about word choices, but now we're starting to get into paragraphs and things start to get a little interesting. I'm not going to explain what a paragraph is other than to tell you that the idea of a paragraph is that it has a central theme. And sometimes in the larger context of a book, it may be difficult to figure out where those breaks should happen. So I do understand that it's not always easy to figure out where a paragraph begins and ends. Sometimes if you've been writing for a long time, it'll just start to come kind of naturally. But sometimes it just requires you to really sit down and go, is this, all in the same theme, or do I need to break this up more? One of the things that they teach in school is that a paragraph should be between 3 and 5 sentences. And this is ridiculous. It is a way of getting students to write, but it is completely arbitrary. 3 to 5 sentences. What if the idea is 7 sentences and then the other idea is 9 sentences and then the next one's 3 sentences? That's how long the paragraph should be. The idea, the central theme of the paragraph is what's important. It's not about sentences and how many there are in a paragraph. So that's the first thing. Don't worry about the sentence length. Your sentence needs to be as long as it needs to be. That also does mean that some paragraphs can be 1 sentence. And it could be a short sentence too. It's okay if it stands out there on its own and has just that little bit of information. It's one of the things for one of the freelance projects that I do, they encourage writers to have sentences by themselves that stand out and create impact in that way. And I think that that's really important to do for writers, and especially ones who've gotten caught up in this 3 to 5 sentence thing. Just forget about that. Forget about the fact that you learned that there needed to be 3 to 5 sentences in a paragraph. Okay? It can be longer. So one of the ideas, and I know that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to moving to the next paragraph, is when do I do this? And it's when the idea changes. And I'm going to read one that I actually typed up, okay? And I'm going to read it because I can't remember all of this. So the first paragraph. Alana went to the store. It was jam-packed with people as it was 2 days until Christmas, and everyone was buying supplies for their holiday feasts. She pushed her way past a particularly large crowd centered around the stuffing and flagged down an employee. That is one idea, right? She's in a crowded store, it's jam-packed, and she's looking for an employee. That's the whole point, right? So in the second paragraph, now we're talking to the employee. The grocery store employee looked haggard, so Alana just asked him to point the direction towards the sesame oil. Around the corner, she spied 2 women arguing, and she found herself automatically walking a bit faster. She hated arguing, and even though it had nothing to do with her, she felt her heart begin to hammer in her chest. The sweat beaded on her forehead, and her hands became clammy. Without a thought, Alana left her groceries in the cart and practically ran out of the store. Much longer paragraph than the first, right? It has now a central idea. You thought it would be about the grocery store employee, but it's not. It's about the fact that she's having an anxiety attack and what's causing that anxiety attack. So the next paragraph is only 2 sentences. This was the worst part of her PTSD. Not only could she not grocery shop, there was an entire pint of Ben & Jerry's in that cart and she was craving it. We go from a couple sentences to a long paragraph to a shorter paragraph, and it's okay. Each of those have an idea, and we're flowing into the next one. And so I'm doing this to shape the paragraph. And it's okay that some are big and some are small. They shouldn't all be the same length. It'd be weird when you're reading if every paragraph is the exact same length. It's also weird when the paragraphs aren't indented, and it's a little strange when there are no indents, when an author it's just a block of text. That's part of the reason why we have paragraphs, so we don't have just a wall of letters going down the page. Again, always a caveat, if it's intentional and that's what you're trying to do, that's completely different. But for the basics of writing, back to the basics, we want to have these little sections so the reader's eye goes down, but also that it flows and readers know when we're moving on to a new idea. A more intermediate skill, and sometimes even more of a advanced skill, is pacing. Understanding when a paragraph is paced well. We talked about in the very first video about sentences having short ones so that you read faster for an action scene, and slow ones that are more languid so the reader feels a little slower within. That pacing also applies to paragraphs and also in scenes. And so you can write a paragraph and nothing happens in it. Like, you write this information, but there's nothing there that moves the story forward or the character forward. We don't get any new information. And so you have to look at that paragraph and say, is that paragraph necessary? Or can I take some of these sentences out and combine this paragraph with another paragraph? Or can I take all these sentences out and just leave one? And that is the most important sentence, and we don't need the rest of it. And honestly, I feel like this is something that you kind of learn as you go, that a pacing of a paragraph feels a little off. So here's a couple of questions you can ask yourself. Is this paragraph doing too much explaining? Is there too much or too little going on in this paragraph? Does some of this work for the scene, but you're being too verbose? Or how does this paragraph further the story along? Those are the questions that you should be asking yourself, and if something feels a little off, or you feel like something's slowed down to the point where nothing's making sense. The next one I'm talking about is varying sentences. And this one is extremely important, and you wouldn't think about it, but it is very, very important. And it is that you don't start a paragraph or the sentences within a paragraph with the same word. Okay. So when you're varying sentences, let's say that you have a character's name, Andrea. Andrea was walking down the road. Andrea saw a car. Andrea suddenly stopped, right? We just said Andrea 3 times, and we started sentences with Andrea 3 times. So within one paragraph, you want to make sure that each sentence starts a little differently. That you're not using he said or Andrea every single time you're starting a sentence. It is so easy to do. I've done it. I've written a whole paragraph and looked back and went, I gotta go back. It also requires you, the author, to be a bit more creative. You're forced, because you don't want to have the same word starting every sentence, you are forced to look at a sentence and figure out a different way of saying it, but still get the same point across in a different way that doesn't require it starting with the same word. It's kind of difficult to do. The reason why you're doing this is not just for flowability, it's also because it's better writing, but also because the reader's eye flows better. So when you're overusing a certain word, the reader's eye kind of jumps on the page. And so we're going to kind of move into the next thing I want to talk about too, which is overusing the same word. When you overuse words, the reader has trouble on the line. And so this is very just like human beings, right? The line they read, and then if they see the word door right below door, or they keep seeing the word door throughout, their eye is going to keep jumping around the page. And this is especially difficult for people who have like dyslexia and things like that. Your eye just kind of bounces around. And so having varied words within a paragraph, but also having varied sentence structures within a paragraph is really important. And the reason why these are not in with the sentence video is because this has to do with the paragraph. You can use the word door in a sentence, that's not bad, but when you've used it 6 times in the same paragraph, in the same block, the reader's eye is going to start jumping and they're going to have trouble. It also sounds really repetitive. If you read it out loud and you do that read aloud test I talked about, you'll start noticing that word just, you're like, oh my gosh, I sound like a broken record. I'm using the same word over and over. Door, 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 door. It doesn't work. I see a lot of authors do it. It's something that I will highlight when I'm editing. I'll just put a highlight and be like, look how many times you use this word. It's really difficult when you're writing nonfiction and you're trying to convey an important thought. Like maybe you're talking about data sets and you do need to use the word data set, but you've used it 12 times in this sentence. And this is a true story. This actually happened 12 times. Let's see where we can go in and actually remove that word, because it's conveyed within the sentence that we're still talking about data sets, or if there are ways that we could at least reduce the amount of uses. I think we got it down to about 3 uses within that paragraph. We still know we're talking about data sets. We used other words to kind of convey the same meaning and just kind of played around with it until it didn't read like a broken record with the same word, expounded upon over and over and over again. One thing that you can't control, but you could if you weren't overusing words, is what I call stacking. So I talked about like the words being next to each other. When a book is typeset by a printer or a publisher, you don't really have a control where those words are on top of one another, because you don't know where they're going to fall within an actual page. You don't know how many characters there are going to be per page. They could do 2,600 characters per page, and that would be completely different than if they squeezed in 3,000 on a page, and it depends on the page is 6x9 or what the gutter margins are, all of that. And you don't know that as the writer unless you are self-publishing and you've already, tested this out on a self-publishing platform. You don't really know where those words are going to stack. And that's why using varying sentence structures and using varying words, you're going to have less of that happening, and you won't have to worry about stacking as much because you're not using the word door 9 times in the same paragraph. The last thing we need to talk about are kind of episodic endings and transitioning to new chapters. When do you know when your paragraph is moving into a completely new chapter as opposed to just moving to the next paragraph? Again, this is a more complex idea. It's something that you're going to kind of discover as you write. Some authors don't have chapters, so they don't even have to worry about it. They just transition to a new scene, and they'll put like a little break or little symbols in there so that the reader knows that you're moving to a new scene. That's also a way to break, though. If the scene ends and you've finished a big thought, so not just the paragraph idea, but you've gone even bigger, and you finish the scene, then that would be a new chapter. A lot of books kind of these days work a lot in like an episodic way. So I want you to think of your favorite TV show. I'll mention one that I like. I like Supernatural. Supernatural is wonderful and terrible all at the same time, and don't give me flack about that. But they have perfected the art of episodic endings, which basically means at the end of every chapter, at the end of every episode, it ends with a bit of a cliffhanger so that you want to come back and watch more. You want to find out what happened the next week. And they're really bad about this at the end of their seasons. Ugh, I hate it. And then you have to wait months for the next one to come out. You can do the same thing. Make it a page turn. Finish that paragraph, but also if it's the end of the section where you left it with a bit of a cliffhanger, make your reader want to turn the page and read the next chapter, like right now. Not wait, not put the book down because it's the end of the chapter. You want them to come back. It's a little harder in nonfiction, obviously, especially if you're writing a kind of like a self-help book or something where readers can kind of stop in or read it almost like a reference guide. You're not going to have the same approach. But that is a way to do it and to know when to break up from a paragraph to paragraph to the beginning of another chapter. Sometimes it's just basically you finish an idea. So like with nonfiction, maybe you are talking about how not to be a jerk to people in public. And your first chapter is going to be about being in retail and dealing with retail workers. And your second chapter is going to be about restaurants and dealing with waiters. You're going to have 2 chapters about those. So obviously you know when the break is because that's how you've kind of set up your book. And sometimes the break is simply a break because there's a scene change. Like I said earlier, you move from inside the house to your uncle's cabin. Obviously, that's, to me, a good place for there to be a chapter break. I know it's very difficult to know when these things happen, and sometimes it's easier to just go ahead and just keep writing through and figure out where your chapter breaks are later. Look at where your scenes are. I like to kind of add them in, especially because if you've ever worked in Scrivener, you can put in the different chapter levels and you can look at your chapters that way, and that helps me organize my thoughts when I'm writing. When I'm editing somebody's book and it doesn't have any chapters and it's fiction, it sometimes feels a little off. Because it just feels like it goes on and on and on, and I'm not being given a bit of a page turn break. That's usually when I ask an author what their intention is for having it. But again, if I'm doing a line edit, I might say, here's the place where I think I'd put a chapter, and here's a place where I think another chapter would go. Because sometimes authors just don't know, especially if they're new and they've not done it before. They just don't know where that break is. It's not coming naturally to them yet. And that is my thing for all of these videos I've talked about so far, is that some of this stuff just comes as you write. and you get better at it, and you learn and you grow, and it starts to make more sense where a paragraph break is, and it starts to make more sense when you're supposed to go on to a new chapter, and that just comes with writing and time. Some of this comes intrinsically to people, and they struggle with other ideas, and they have trouble with, varying their words in their sentences. They're not a bad writer, but they just, for some reason, want to use he at the beginning of all their sentences. And if that's the case, then that just takes some work kind of, getting that out of your system, I think. This is the end of our third part of the Back to Basics series. We are going to be talking about in the next video, clarifying text, and I'll explain what that means next time. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to my channel. We post new writing tips almost every Friday. I've been Venus with Galaxy Ink. I hope your writing is out of this world.